Hello and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be going over The One Thing by Gary Keller. It's a great book, all things productivity and how to get the most out of life. Very, very interesting. It's not going to be what you think it's going to be about. It's quite a lot deeper than just some of the practical advice that you would think of when you think of the book, The One Thing. Very, very deep on finding your purpose and very, very deep on how to get the most out of your life using some of the techniques and tips that he's going to show, but really letting your purpose guide you. So first off, we're going to go into the introduction. So the One Thing introduction is where Gary had accomplished great things in his life, his concentration was narrowed. Where his success varied, his focus had too. And I should probably say that Gary Keller is probably one of the largest real estate holding individuals in the entire world. He has a giant real estate company, at least here in Canada, called Keller Williams, and he has a lot of just real estate holdings of his own, and some of the tips and tricks in his book are what he used to build such a great big real estate company. So the way to get the most of your life is to go as small and as narrow as possible. So again, it's where your focus is, that's going to be where you are most successful, and where you don't have a ton of concentration, you don't have a ton of focus, that's going to be where you aren't going to be able to make as quick of gains or as quick of changes in your life. So if you want to achieve a lot of extraordinary things, it actually takes subtraction and not addition. And this is an interesting anecdote as well with things like Cal Newport's Deep Work and other productivity books. You'll notice that a lot of the great thinkers on productivity and success tend to give us advice to take things away and not focus on things. And I really believe that's because we only have a set amount of attention and a set amount of focus that we can give to anything in one day or in 1 week or in any time period. And really what we need to do is try and get rid of the unimportant, and then that leaves us enough energy to be able to focus on the things that are important. So the next kind of major concept here is the domino effect. A single domino is capable of toppling another domino 50% larger than itself, which is something I actually didn't realize. That means that after 50 dominoes, if you line them all up, you could topple one the size of Mount Everest. And at just 57, you could topple one that would touch the moon. And that's very interesting. It's the power of exponential growth. So toppling dominoes is pretty straightforward. You just line them up and you topple the first one. So in order to be successful, find the lead domino and whack away, right? Even if you started with just a normal sized domino, after 57 dominoes, you'd be able to topple one that would touch the moon. But that first domino is just the normal size of a domino. It's just about focusing your attention in the right direction, and finding the right one thing to focus on is going to lead you to that massive success over the long term. The next kind of major point that we're going to make in the introduction is success leaves clues. This is something that you've heard a lot of people talk about. The one thing is actually everywhere if you know what you're looking for. So after we've gone through and we've explained what the one thing is, you'll notice that a lot of successful people are using it even if they don't use the word. So one product or service is what many great companies are built on. Think of Apple, think of any of the major companies in the world. They usually have one core product or service that they are providing. And if they have more than that, that generally is something that they've created after they've found their massive success and they've decided to expand their product line in order to become more successful. But obviously they have a lot more manpower to be able to focus on more than one thing. One person is all it takes to help successful people achieve their goals. And in this one, he talks a lot about how people who are brought up and they're trying to become something super successful, it usually takes one great coach. It usually takes one parent that's going to push them a little bit further. It usually takes one person that they've gotten advice from that's going to make the biggest change in their life. And it really means you don't need a ton of people. If you focus intently on finding the one person that's going to have the biggest impact on your life, that's going to be where you are making the most out of your life. So one thing is all it takes for truly successful people to leave an impact lasting on millions. So think about, for example, people who are teaching one specific thing. Let's think about Tony Robbins, maybe, for example. Tony Robbins really teaches self-development, and that's kind of his one thing, right? But he's been able to have an impact on millions and millions of people because he's really dedicated his life to that one thing of helping people with personal development. So you can see how focusing on one thing is really all you need. And really here, I think kind of the subtext that maybe isn't in the mind map and isn't necessarily in the book, that if you tend to focus on more than one thing, if you want to be world class at more than one thing, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to find someone who is world class at more than one thing. And it's going to be almost impossible to find someone who is world class at 3 or 4 things. But meanwhile, a lot of people who are just starting out in business or just starting out in their lives are trying to focus on more than one thing because they're kind of hedging their bets. And I think Gary's kind of talking about how hedging your bets is going to cause you to be unsuccessful, when most people think that hedging your bets is maybe the way to go ahead and be successful. So the next little part that we have here, or the next subheadline that we have here, is the lies that are told to us about success. And one of the lies is that everything matters equally. And this is very interesting because when we think about everything matters equally, this is essentially the same as the Pareto principle that we'll talk about here as well. When everything feels urgent and important, everything seems equal. And this is, again, we're maybe talking a little bit about Deep Work by Cal Newport, where if you were treating all your shallow work, all your deep work with the same amount of intensity and urgency, then you're not going to be able to really focus on the things that matter and provide value for the world. Activity is often unrelated to productivity, and busyness rarely takes care of business. And again, you could superimpose the 7 habits of highly effective people, which I'll leave a link down here. You don't want to be focusing on the urgent and important all the time, because it doesn't lead to productivity. It just leads to busyness. Successful people don't work from to-do lists. They work from a clear sense of priority. And once you know what is the highest and best use, you can create a success list following the domino effect. So how many of us are constantly setting ourselves with to-do lists filled with a bunch of shallow tasks that need to get done? Probably all of us are doing that on a daily basis. But how many of us are really taking the time to think of what is a priority, our main priority, and then working backwards from that main priority? What can I do right now in the here and now? What's the one thing that I can do right now that's going to have the biggest effect on that one priority that I have? So as I said before, we're going to go into the Pareto principle a little bit here. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically the idea that 20% of your activities will get you 80% of the results. And I believe it was created by an Italian economist who noticed that his garden, that 20% of his plants were giving him 80% of the fruits, or 80% of the vegetables. And he took that and he expanded it into economy, and he realized that 20% of the investments that were being made are giving 80% of the returns. And it's really a great principle to know because it works in everything. So choosing to spend time on that 20% is the core essence of the one thing. And when you're doing the one thing, what you really want to do is take that 20% and turn that 20% into the 20% of the 20%, because even inside of that, it's fractal. It's continuing to go down until you find the one thing that is going to be the most important thing and going to have the most impact on your life, or on whatever your priority is. So the next lie is multitasking. And a lot of success books end up talking about this, but the human mind is set up to crave multitasking because our ancestors needed to do it in order to survive. But with so many distractions in an environment that feeds into distraction, multitasking no longer serves us, right? So when we were on the plains, we needed to know where is our food, and we also needed to know how not to become food. And we needed to have both those two competing ideas in our minds at all times, as well as maybe knowing where our family is, and etc. And that was important for us when we were, on the plains and we were hunter-gatherers. But nowadays, there is so many things going on that there is no way that you can have your mind on so many different tasks at once. And task switching is when we switch from one mentally demanding task to another mentally demanding task. And task switching can cause anywhere from 25% time bump for simple tasks like switching back and forth from social media, or a 100% time bump for more complicated tasks, where, for example, if you're answering an email that is maybe more mentally demanding and you should be working on your one thing, it could take you 100% more time to do your one thing, simply because your attention, concept from deep work, your attention has left a residue on the thing that you were working on that wasn't necessarily your one thing, that wasn't necessarily your most important task. And task switching exact a cost that few are even aware they are paying. So sometimes you don't even notice that all of a sudden you've lost 30 minutes to social media, or all of a sudden you haven't been able to focus intently on whatever task is your number one priority, because you are thinking about some less important tasks, but your mind still has a certain amount of its energy placed on them. Every time we try to do two or more things at once, we're simply taking our focus away from our most important tasks and dumbing ourselves down. And this is totally evident in the research. There is only so much brain capacity available at one time. The more time you spend on a secondary task, the less likely you are to circle back to that main task, right? That's kind of the looping that happens with any kind of distraction, is that if you start and you do 5 minutes of distraction, there's a certain amount of resistance to you getting into your most important task. But if you do 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour of distraction, there's even more of that resistance to you getting back into your most important task. This is something that I've talked about quite a bit before, that chronic multitaskers distort how long things take to get done and almost always overestimate the time something will take. So when you are, say for example, working on a project, you'll notice that a lot of people will say this project is going to take 4 hours to complete. But really, if they were doing one single task, it could take them 1 hour to do. And that's the effect that chronic multitasking has, is if you're working on more than one task at a time, you can never really know how long a specific task is going to take, because all tasks are ending up taking you way longer than they really should be taking. Multitaskers are making more mistakes than single taskers, and this is again bore out in the research, and that multitaskers experience much more stress than single taskers, because even though you're getting less done while you're multitasking, your brain is working on overdrive to try and keep all of those balls juggling at the same time. So the next lie that we're going to go into is the lie of a disciplined life. So the lie of a disciplined life is that there's an idea that a successful person is a disciplined person. This is actually a lie, and you can be more successful being less disciplined than you think. Success is about doing the right thing, not about doing everything. And this is a huge revelation for me when I first got into business, is that I thought that I had to be working 14-hour days, 7 days a week, because I didn't know what to focus on. I thought that I needed to get everything done, and I needed to make sure that all of the things getting done were getting done in a timely manner, as fast and as urgently as I possibly could. But now, since I've been in business for over 10 years, I've really realized that you focus on doing the right thing, and it liberates you from having to monitor everything else. And it really is about focusing on this one most important priority, and when you focus on that, everything else just seems to fall into place around you. So success is actually a short race. Just be disciplined long enough for habit to kick in and take over. And we've talked about habit quite a bit on this channel as well, and how habit is hard to create, but it's very easy to continue. So habits kicked in and after about 66 days, it says in this book. I've seen research that says 21 days, 66 days, 180 days. It's all over the place. And I believe that it is different based on what habit you're trying to put in. But there is a certain amount of time that once you have put in the work, that the habit just ends up becoming automatic and easier for you to do. So it takes over the discipline. So you only need the discipline to choose the right habits and follow them for 66 days or however long it takes until that habit sinks in. So those with the right habits seem to be the most successful. They have chosen the right things and are doing them regularly. I can't overstate how much consistency is important when it comes to business, entrepreneurship, and self-development. Doing one hard thing one time is not going to have nearly the impact as doing a bunch of little things all of the time and continually. So a disciplined life is a lie. You don't need that much discipline. You just need to be able to create the right habits for yourself and choose to do the right things. The next lie is that willpower is always on will call. And this is something that we've talked about quite a bit as well, is that success often seems so straightforward. All I need to do is XYZ and I will achieve what I want. But it's always a lot more difficult than what it seems because of willpower. It seems like, if you've, for whatever reason, you feel like you've come up with a plan that will be really successful. It feels like 90% of the work is done. But really, 10% of the work is creating that plan, and 90% of the work is actually doing the work. So great success takes a lot of willpower, but willpower is a finite resource, and its use needs to be well planned and its reserves replenished. So this is again another concept from deep work, and it's why I choose to do my deep work first thing in the morning, because I have the most willpower first thing in the morning. So make sure you do your one thing first, because willpower is at its highest in the morning. And this might be slightly different for other people, but for me, that's definitely what I have noticed, is that if I don't get right into my one thing right away, I will be losing valuable time when it comes to my willpower. So willpower is what it takes to exact discipline. So only choose one new habit to build at a time, lest you sacrifice them all by depleting your willpower too quickly. And I think this is huge. If you're not doing things out of compulsion in your day, if you're not doing a lot of habits that don't serve you, you are best to start by building one new habit at a time. Now, if you're doing things out of compulsion and doing a lot of habits that are hurting you, I think you're better to attack those all at once, and probably by doing some meditation on your meaning in life. But really what you need to do is build one new habit at a time and try and make it as small as you possibly can when you first get started, because when you make it as small as you possibly can, you get a few wins. And then once you get a few wins, it seems like it's easier and easier and easier to do the bigger things in a day. And you also start to build up trust within yourself in order to be able to exact willpower on creating a new habit. So this also says make sure to eat right, because your blood sugar seems to have a huge impact on willpower. And any of you guys who have ever tried to get in shape before, you will absolutely be able to attest to this. When you're extremely hungry, you feel like not doing anything, and it is way harder to make the right choices when it comes to what you're eating. So often it's much better to not let yourself get too hungry, and it's better to keep yourself well fed and just with the healthy foods. So the next lie is a balanced life. No matter how imperceptible it might be, what appears to be a state of balance is something entirely different, an act of balancing, and therefore the goal isn't actually balance, but counterbalancing. So this was a little bit hard for me to understand when I first got into it, but here's what he's trying to say. When you have a scale, let's say you have one of those scales that has a bucket on one side and a bucket on the other side, it's not actually that you have work life and home life that are exactly the same weights and you're going to try and keep them exactly the same weight all the time, but really sometimes your work is going to be heavier and you're going to have to take a little bit away from your home life, and sometimes your home life is going to be a little bit more demanding and you're going to have to take some away from your work life. And being okay with that is really the act of balancing, and it's not the act of balance, if that makes sense to you guys. So think about balancing two buckets. One is your work life and the other one is your personal life. Not only is there a balance between the two, but there's actually a balance within the bucket. So we're getting even one step deeper here. So in your work life bucket, view your work as involving skill or knowledge that must be mastered, and give disproportionate time to your one thing. This means you'll have to devote a lot less time to other less meaningful things that fall to the side in order to counterbalance. So you can see that you want to be balancing your work life and your home life, but also within your work life, you want to make sure that you are putting a disproportionate amount of time to your one thing, but because you have a finite amount of time in your work life, you're going to have to give up some of the less valuable things. And the same exact thing goes with your home life. Personal life is actually several different areas that are all important. For each person, it will be different, and each person will have to spend a different amount of time on each area. Just know that when you spend a lot of time on one certain area, you need to take time away from another area. And these are all choices that you're going to have to make yourself. You're going to have to make choices between alone time. You're going to have to make choices between family time, friend time. You're going to have to make choices between recreational activities. And you really have to create an act of balancing, because you have a finite amount of time in each one. And it's really important to be able to focus deeply on the ones that are the most important, and then just be able to be okay with the ones that are not as important going to the wayside a little bit. And our last and final lie is that big is bad. And this is one that is very pervasive in today's society, and I even had to really work through this when I first started out in business as well, is that most people think, what do I do next when it comes to success in most areas of their life? Instead of thinking, what do I do next, try thinking big. Instead of thinking, how can I get 10? Think, how can I get 20? That practically guarantees that you're going to hit your goal. And you've heard a lot of people talk about this before, but to put it into perspective, if you're thinking about achieving something, think about how can you achieve a little bit more than that. And you're going to have to put a little bit more work in. You're going to have to put a little bit more focus and time into it, but it will practically guarantee that you'll get what you want. And if you don't get what you want, you'll likely get more than what you wanted in the first place. So don't fear setting big goals, fear mediocrity, fear waste, fear the lack of living your life to your fullest. And when we fear big, we either consciously or subconsciously work against it. We either run towards lesser outcomes or run away from bigger ones. And this is something that you can notice if you become aware of yourself, is where are you trying to find outs? Where are you trying to put the onus of success or failure on something other than yourself? Really important self-reflection exercises there. So only living big will let you experience your true life and work your full potential, especially when you have done the meditation on your meaning in life, on your ikigai, and I'll leave some of these links down below in the description for you guys. Very, very important to, once you have that ikigai, once you have that meaning for your life, like Viktor Frankl talks about in his books, it's important to play on a big level, because once you have that meaning, you want to make the maximum impact with your life, because after all, we only get one. So it is very important to play on a big level and not be afraid of playing on that big level to be able to fully express your meaning and your contribution. So the next sub-headline that we're going to go underneath here is the actual truth. And this is kind of basically the opposite of all of these lies that are being told, and everything is going to come into focus here with the one thing. So typical habits that are taught today are about what you need to do. You need to wake up early, you need to work incredibly long hours, and say yes to every opportunity. This causes us to live a life clenched, life where we are always unhappy, overworked, or overwhelmed. And I should say that this next headline is called The Truth of Being Unclenched. So unclenching simply means ditching those habits and following the one thing. So I'll go back up here. When we're talking about living a life clenched, this is where you've seen even successful people burn out. And this is where you see unsuccessful people being perpetually stuck because they don't have the energy to master anything, because they're constantly trying to put things on themselves because of external stimulus, or they're in a paradigm, so to say, of what Stephen Covey would say. They're in a paradigm where they feel like they have to continually work harder and harder and harder. And to a certain extent, successful people are the people that have been able to hold themselves to that for a long time. And again, this is only outward success. But people who are unsuccessful, that aren't able to get to that level of success, are just burnt out because they keep trying to put these success habits on themselves that other people are telling them about, or that they're seeing other people live out in their lives. And it's not really the way to go, because if you're constantly clenched, you're going to be continually stressed. And unclenching means ditching those habits and following the one thing. Success comes down to being appropriate with your time, not the tips and tricks. And this again is what Stephen Covey talks about in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's about being appropriate with your time, because after all, we can't manage time, we can only manage ourselves. And you need to focus on what's important to you and how you can be successful, and maybe what your first domino is, rather than focusing on how much time can you put in. Because like Cal Newport says in his book, that valuable work is time committed times focus. So you need to make sure that you are committing time to your important priorities, but also that you're focusing on your important priorities. The next question we're going to ask here when it comes to unclenching is, can you honestly say that this is where you are supposed to be and you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing? That's what really leads to success. Very, very interesting question you could be asking yourself. And if you can kind of condition yourself to ask that question, you will be more successful. And speaking of questions, we're going to go into the focusing question, which is the next truth. The quality of any answer depends on the quality of the question. And if you think about this, really we're living our lives asking questions, and really the answers that we find depend on the quality of the questions that we're asking. So the questions that we ask ourselves determine the answers that eventually become our lives. And pay attention to the questions you're asking yourself right now and realize that you're exactly where your questions have led you. So for example, if you're continually asking, say for example, you have some sort of a negative question that you're continually asking yourself, like, why can't I be successful? Or why haven't I been able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish? That is going to lead you to continually reaffirming that you haven't done what you wanted to do. And it also is going to lead you to continually thinking about all the reasons why you can't do what you want to do. And instead, if you turn that question around and you asked a better quality question and said, what can I do to get towards what I wanted to do right now? That might be something that would lead you towards success and lead you towards that priority that you're trying to do. So what's the one thing I can do? So Gary Keller actually created this question, and it's a great question. If you can get in the habit of asking yourself this one, what's the one thing that I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So what's the one thing that I can do? This question is kind of broken down. This is the anatomy of this question right here. It sparks focus. What's the one thing that I can do? Sparks focus. And it also forces specificity. And it directs you to choose something that is possible. Very, very interesting way of breaking this down. You can see how in-depth it actually is. You don't necessarily need to think about all of these all this anatomy here, but just asking this question will help you out. The next part, such that by doing it, it's a bridge between just doing something and doing something for a specific purpose. It lets you know to dig deep, because once you do the one thing, that something else is going to happen for you. So this is kind of, if you focus on this question right here, it's the bridge between actually doing something and doing something for a specific purpose. Everything else will be easier or unnecessary. And Archimedes said that if you give me a long enough lever, I can move the world. This is essentially, it breaks down, like we talked about before, the act of finding your one domino and being able to topple a domino that's the size of the moon. And most things don't need to be done. Exactly the same thing that we had talked about before really is the act of finding things that you shouldn't be focusing on in order to free up enough time and mental energy to find the things that you should be focusing on. So that focusing question, you guys should write that down. What's the one thing that I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? You can ask yourself that every single day. You can ask yourself that every single week. And you can ask yourself that between every single project that you're doing. The next truth that we're going to go into is the success habit. The focusing question is the foundational habit to achieving extraordinary results and lead a big life. And this is where we're going to get into the habit of continually asking yourself that. Apply it to the important areas of your life, which include spiritual, health, personal life, relationship, job, and financial life. You should ask yourself, what is the one thing that I can do such that by doing it, everything else in my spiritual life will be easier or unnecessary, or my health or my personal life. Obviously your job and financial life as well. So the next part is make it a daily habit. Asking yourself the focusing question consistently helps you stay on track every single day. And when you feel a lack of, if you feel off track or you've lost the focusing question, to get the answers to what you should be doing, you should use the focusing question, to get the answers to what you should be doing, especially if you feel off track. And that's the habit, continually asking yourself that. And continually asking yourself in all of these domains, right? Sometimes we'll take in personal development advice and we'll just apply it to these two bottom ones, which Gary says in the book that the spiritual life, health, personal life, and relationship all come before the job and the financial life. So you should ask yourself that focusing question within the top most important areas of your life first. And the last one is the path to great answer. And you can remember that we said before that the quality of your answer depends on the quality of the question. So the path to great answers is our next truth. The first one is obviously to ask a great question. It's got to be big and specific. What's something big that will make you stretch? Again, same thing with deep work and flow. Everything has to be a slight stretch of your current capabilities. So put a time frame on the end question to make it specific. Again, same thing. This is putting you into the ability to get into that flow state, because you have to be able to measure your results. So here's the example. And again, the same thing. We're coming back to big is not bad with this example question. How can I double my sales in the next 6 months? That's a huge question. Double my sales. If you're in business, doubling sales is huge, and you made it very specific, which is in 6 months. That's gigantic. You would 4x your company in a year if you did that twice in a row. So to find a great answer, the answers come in 3 categories. It's doable, stretch, and possibility. So here's the real thing. Doable, we already know how to do it, and we won't have to change much to accomplish it. You might find the answer to your question from that, and I would say if you find a doable answer from your big and specific question, it probably wasn't big or specific enough. The next one is the stretch, which is right at the end range of your current ability. It's potentially achievable and probable, but depending on your effort. So that's exactly the same thing we talked about before. What's something that's going to make me stretch my current abilities? And possibility is the last one, the one that we're going to want to aim for. It's past a stretch goal. This is something that you might not normally think is possible. So first, the 2 steps to achieve this possibility, which this is where you want to ask yourself, you want to ask a question so big and specific that you're going to have to force yourself to get to possibility. The first thing you need to do to achieve a possible answer here is to learn, study, and research people who have done it before. So if you can find someone who has done your big and specific goal before, you need to learn, study, research, potentially get coaching from them. That's why I think all of this stuff is so valuable. And then the second is called trending, and it's looking for the next step. The stretch goal has become your baseline, and now your task is to find something that you can do that's just past that line. So if you know how to get to the stretch goal, all you have to do is make it something that's just a little bit past that. And through the power of the domino effect, you're constantly tipping over bigger and bigger and bigger dominoes, and you'll eventually get to that possibility, that answer of possibility, what you can possibly accomplish, which again is living big. And we have to remember that big is not bad. So those are the truths that we talk about in the one thing. You can see through all of these, the lies, the introduction, and the truth, we've really kind of shown that the one thing is the way to go with anything that you're doing. And we've given you a couple of habits and a couple of ways to find the one thing in any avenue of your life. The next part is going into extraordinary results. And this is really where I was talking about in the very beginning. It's more than just a productivity book. It's really about living this life with purpose, this life with priority, and this life of productivity. So based on that, these extraordinary results, we use an iceberg analogy. At the tip of the iceberg is productivity. At the middle of the iceberg, just below the surface, is priority. And at the very bottom, the biggest part of the iceberg submerged in the water is your purpose. And productivity is the tip of the iceberg. It's all we see. But below the surface, productivity, right, the things that you're getting done in a day, are supported by your priority and your purpose. So we're going to talk about this iceberg from the bottom up. So we're going to talk about purpose, which is the base of the iceberg first. So happiness happens on the way to fulfillment. Very interesting concept here. Seeking happiness is not the best way to find it. Lasting happiness happens when you make your life about something bigger, something that brings meaning and purpose to your everyday actions. And I think, everything that we've talked about on this channel completely points towards this, from Viktor Frankl to Ikigai. The happiest people in the world have something bigger than themselves, and they're contributing value to something bigger themselves. And here's how you can discover your big why, right? This is kind of Start With Why with Simon Sinek. Ask yourself what drives you, what gets you up in the morning, and what keeps you going when you're tired. That's why you're excited for life and why you're doing what you're doing. So very important and an interesting concept, again, if you haven't watched some of those other videos, that you don't need to necessarily find your purpose. It's more of a process of uncovering it. It's more of a process of finding it within yourself, because everyone already has it. You just need to figure out how to find it for yourself. So absent an answer, just pick a direction. If you can't find that, if you, for whatever reason, are feeling blocked when it comes to your purpose in life, purpose and big why sound heavy, but they don't have to be. Think of it more like the one thing you want your life to be about more than any other thing. Try writing it down and marching down the path for a little while, right? One of my mentors always says that action creates clarity. So this is a really great way to go about creating some action around finding your purpose. Time brings clarity, and if you find you don't connect with the purpose you've written down like you thought, you could always change your mind. It's not written in stone. It's just written on paper, so to speak. So really important, find your purpose before we can move into live your life by priority. Live with purpose and you know where you want to go. Live with priority and you'll know how to get there, right? So purpose is what we want to accomplish, and priority is figuring out how to set your goals in order to get you there. So setting distant goals is important as a guiding post to measure our priorities based on our purpose. But it's a poor motivation tool, as it's so far away it's easy to procrastinate. And I've talked about this quite a lot on the channel as well, that purpose and meaning is very, very important, but sometimes it's not going to be everything that'll push you through the day. So setting goals starting from someday and then leading to now is the solution. And this is the way that you can think about it. What's the one thing that I would like to accomplish? Or that's, in other words, your purpose. And what's the one thing I would like to accomplish someday? You can write that down. What's the one thing I would like to accomplish 5 years from now? You can write that down. 1 year from now, monthly, weekly, daily, and right now. You can see how this focusing question and the success habit can really lead you all the way through what you would like to accomplish someday or with your life at the end, all the way until the right now. So you see how it looks similar to the domino effect from before. You can see if you start from right now, you push down a small domino and you can get that done right now. And that leads to your daily, weekly, and eventually you lead to the big domino of someday, which is accomplishing your purpose. And the final point that we're going to make here is live life for productivity. And productivity is putting together a life of extraordinary results simply from getting the most out of what you do when what you do matters. Therefore, the most successful people are the people that are the most productive people. And obviously this is the part of the iceberg that is going to be shown. You've set your goals, you have your purpose. This is the way that you're going to accomplish those things. And the first thing that we're going to talk about here is called time blocking. It's the act of scheduling your time in advance. First, block off your time. First block your time off. I've talked about this quite a lot on the channel as well, and this was a big breakthrough for me when I read the book, is that successful people see themselves working between vacations. Least successful people don't reserve time off because they don't think they'll deserve it or be able to afford it. This is something that was huge for me when I was an entrepreneur for the first 10 years, or even probably for the first 8 years of being an entrepreneur. I didn't schedule weeks off. I didn't schedule a vacation, long weekends, or even just a day off, because I figured that I was going to have to work forever because this is the path that I chose. But now that I see myself as working between the vacations, I feel compelled to work even harder during those times, and I feel compelled to focus more and put in more focused effort towards my top priorities and continue to try and 80-20 my business as much as I can, because now I have time in between and I want to be able to enjoy those vacations. And in order for myself to enjoy those vacations, I need to feel like I deserve those vacations. So first, you want to block your time off, whether it's days, weeks, or even just days off. Resting is as important as working, and you feel recharged when you come back. The next is that you want to block off your one thing. The most important work comes second because you need time to be well rested for it. And not very many people will talk about that as a form of productivity, because with working 7 days a week and being entrepreneurs running so rampant nowadays, seems like it's not as important, but time off is very, very important. So design your day around your one thing. Do one thing in the morning when you have the most mental energy if possible. Try and block out at least 4 hours a day and do everything that you can to protect it. And why do we do 4 hours a day? It's because 4 hours every workday for 10 years leads to mastery. In other words, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours rule, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about before. 4 hours a day every workday. After 10 years, you will be a master at whatever craft you have been working on. And if you don't focus on that, you may never become a master. So time block your planning time. Block 1 hour each week to review your annual and monthly goals. So those are the same things that we talked about in living our life by priority and goal setting to the now. Set your goals for your monthly and your yearly and your weekly, and take 1 hour each week. Based on where I am right now, what's the one thing I need to do this week in order to stay on track for my monthly goal and for my monthly goal to be on track for my annual goal? Very important. Block your time for planning. And I like to do this on a Friday afternoon, and I'll get out of the office and I'll just use this as thoughts. I won't necessarily have to be on my computer because I can think this through. It's a kind of a productive meditation for me. So keep track of your one thing by marking a red X on a calendar every time you finish your 4 hours. Again, same thing. This is the Jerry Seinfeld technique of chain. So you have a calendar on your desk and you mark it down with a big red X and continually build that chain. So eventually you'll build up a chain and you won't want to break it. And I can attest to that now that I have a deep work chain going fairly long, I don't want to break that chain because then I'll have to feel like I'm starting over again. The final part of this time blocking technique that Gary teaches us here is to protect your time blocks at all cost. Nothing and no one has permission to distract me from my one thing. You need to set up any barrier and every barrier needed to keep people from distracting you, and also you need to set up any and every barrier needed to keep yourself from distracting you. And I said this when I was talking about eliminating distraction in my summary of Deep Work by Cal Newport. Very important to keep yourself from distracting you, because after all, you are the one that's going to distract you the most. You would be surprised. And that's really it for The One Thing by Gary Keller. Very informative book. It's a fairly short read, but it has packed full of a ton of great information from one of the world's top real estate investors. Not very often do you get to read a book from someone as successful as Gary Keller and see the inner workings of his mind and his productivity habits. Anyways, that's the end of the book. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch it, and I'll see you again next time.